Josh, how did this text work on you this week?
I think it's just a great reason for us to praise. You know, it's that's what really gives me courage in preaching and preparing this text. It's like God is worthy; He's worthy of our praise, and what He's done, who He is. You know.
Brian?
I just love the central question that you had, of like, when you go through a difficult time or adversity, does it lead you to praise? I think that's just a great thing that I'll be thinking about for a week, and so, or thinking about how that doesn't happen.
Victor?
Yeah, even though your main point was primarily deliverance that leads to praise, I felt you took us through trust. That was like the connecting thing for me, and trust leads us, I think you said something like this, trust leads us to praise because of the deliverance that we have experienced, right? So that was really encouraging, just to grow in our trust of God continually through good times and bad, right? That was kind of the point there. The scary moments lead us to trust God more.
Dia?
Yeah, I think I always appreciate when you're preaching, like your tone and like how you make God seem like big when you're preaching. And I think you did that here very well too, and it just made me just think about like what a mighty God we serve, and yeah, appreciate that a lot.
Trev?
Yeah, it's a good reminder, Josh, that God leads us not into something that's going to destroy us, but so that we can trust in Him. And just a reminder for me of God's goodness. Sometimes you can question it a bit, like, is God doing something wrong here? But this story shows that no, He's got a really good purpose for this, and it's for our good, and He's a good God. So appreciate that.
Yeah, for me, I was convicted at a point of application that you made, where you talked about Israelites' fear before the armies, and just said man, we fear, they did it better than we do probably. And when you think about the things we fear, I just was that kind of stuff causes me discouragement and doubt, things that are far less scary than having a world power army chasing me down.
Right.
So I was like, man, that kind of reveals faithlessness on my part. Where's an area that you think you have an opportunity to improve in this sermon?
Yeah. I don't know, I think just maybe some illustrations a little bit more could have helped a few more times, like stepping back a minute from the text, because it's a long text and there's a lot of going through it, so maybe just thinking through and developing that a little bit more, and maybe more application for our lives, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I would say you're obviously very comfortable preaching, you're comfortable up there, but I think at a couple times you kind of create a rhythm, and sometimes I get a little zone out a little bit because I was just in a rhythm a little bit, and so which a rhythm is also good sometimes, but I also felt like your questions helped to turn that up, and so to shake that rhythm a little bit. So I would say that would be one thing that I kind of struggled with a little bit, but the questions really helped that too. So
your point is you want more dynamic in his delivery, speed,
Yep.
pace, tone,
Yep.
volume.
Yep.
Victor?
Yeah, I thought you had great application peppered throughout the entire sermon. My critique would be that it maybe felt a little long in the retelling of the story rather than explaining the story. although I think you were getting at it by means of application, but it wasn't so direct, I would say, in some ways. Kind of retelling, explaining. That's what
So you're saying he was just explaining, or he was just retelling the story to us?
in some ways, yeah.
Yeah, alright.
Theo?
I think I got generally your main point fairly well, but I think I had a hard time following like a structure, and so it felt like you were saying a lot of really good things, but it was hard for me to catch it all. So that was just the thing I was like feeling.
Is there a specific instance of where you're thinking?
Not necessarily. I think like it's just like a question. I remember like one person like told me they were like we really liked your sermon, but when I like reflect back on it and try to like list out like what exactly did Theo say in like a sentence or an outline or something like that, it's like I'd have a hard time like doing that. And I think like your sentence is pretty clear up front, like God's great deliverance leads us to praise, but like how your sermon broke up to like support that, it would be hard for me to recreate.
Yeah, I think I felt that especially in the first half, like you didn't like say a lot of how the smaller bits in your talk about praise, or deliverance, like you just talked about like stuck in a trap, how do you react, it's a highway, he protects and saves, but like you just didn't relate that, any of it back to this main first homiletical point. So it was like, I don't know if that's kind of a little bit like what you were thinking, or I kind of felt like, oh yeah, he's retelling the story, but you weren't relating it to what you had said your first point was. Jeff?
And I missed even that main point. Maybe you said it and I was just like daydreaming or something, but I did catch your title, and so that helped me sort of go through it, but I was maybe another few repetitions or something like that in there to get back to that main point would be helpful.
An opportunity that I had for you actually comes from the thing that I think challenged me, this kind of application about fear. I just thought you could have worded it or phrased it a bit differently. So you said something like, they're facing armies. Do we fear, when we're having arguments or people in the church or whatever? And I think you could have, like, you tried to say that they did better than we did. So I think what you could have done is say, like, you tried to say, like, well, maybe we can sympathize with them a little, right? I mean, they're looking down the barrel of the gun, right? Like, there's this army right here. And instead of just saying, just like that, we get worried about X, Y, or Z.
Mm-hmm.
You could have said, is this how severe our problems are that cause us to fear? Or what is it that makes you fear? Is it something this big, or is it something much more trite? Alright? So you like equated them, but that's not what you were thinking, because you were thinking they did better than us. And I think you can demonstrate that by saying they did better because the thing that they're facing is way more severe than what we face. And so I think that would make your application land to be like, yeah, we laugh at them, but they were looking at an army. Laugh at yourself when you're worried about, like, if your kid got a B on their report card and you're worried about their, whatever it is you're going to go, right? Like, so just the way you set it up, I thought you could just help by heightening it. You got another one, Brian?
Yeah, it's really little, but you gave an introduction before you read the text, and then after is whenever it felt like before you got into your point, you had another really small introduction, and so I'd say just combine them to make sure that you give the points maybe before the text. That way, whenever you come out of the text, you can jump straight into the first point. So, but that was very little.
Victor?
Yeah, I see how you made the connection to the gospel in Revelation with the Song of the Lamb and the Song of Moses connected, but I thought maybe that's more of like a result of the deliverance that Christ has brought us. Like, I don't know, maybe another connection before going to that, but I see more like an implication of that deliverance that's already worked out. Like you mentioned, the defeat of our enemies. So like Colossians came to mind, like through the cross he like exposed principalities and all that, put them to shame, defeated them. So I don't know, I thought I could see I could see where you went, but not.
It didn't appear in how you presented it like really tight in terms of how you made that jump. I think you might be able to get there without stopping at Colossians. But again, I was just like, oh, whoa, like all of a sudden we're now in Revelation. And how did the song, you had this question that I didn't feel like you paid off on. Your question was, how does the Song of Moses turn into the Song of the Lamb?
Mm.
And you said, Jesus came to take away sin.
Mm.
And I was like, wait, so how does that turn the Song of Moses into, like, I just wasn't clear about that. So you maybe just need to flesh that out. That's where you were trying to make that connection. But whatever you mean by this, Jesus appeared to take away sin, that's where you need to flesh out to show this kind of tight connection. Theo?
I think just like, I think you were like trying to like get away from your notes a little bit more, and like I think that's like a good thing to do. I think some phrases and stuff sounded a little bit funny to me. Our complaining should lead us to praise, or the Lord fights against the Egyptians. It was just like, I don't know, it's like to me it just felt like, I feel like, there was like more sharper ways to like say those things that were a little bit less like ambiguous as to what they meant. So like you were saying, like, and like the Egyptians realized like too late that the Lord fights against the Egyptians. I was like, hey, there might be something else you could like, and the Egyptians realized too late that like the Lord fights for his people or something like that. It just like sharpened those things up a little bit. So.
Jeff?
Close to the end there, you kind of mentioned this idea of like from Exodus to Revelation, God's praise is heard. And that's true, and I like how that kind of lines up with your points. But I think the way you said it, it sort of like flattened it out a little bit, because in between those, there's, as we know, there's all these great like conflict and struggle, and there's a lot that happens in there, but ultimately it is to God's praise. And so maybe just adding a couple sentences in there, how this will all result in God's praise, but in the meantime, it's gonna be a struggle, and that deliverance, it's difficult. And I think you pointed that to in different areas of your text, but maybe just add a little bit of that in there so it doesn't flatten it too much.
I thought one other thing that would have helped would be to make your argument more nuanced to this passage, because there's like all kinds of ways God delivers in the Bible, and they lead to praise. I mean, think of how many Psalms you could quote that are that. You could think of Judges like 4 and 5, which are almost the same kind of thing. So I think there were particularities, especially like this idea of fighting for his people. He's a man of war. Like, so I think this kind of violence, the God the warrior, is a way that he saved, something like that. That might help you then get to Revelation 15, where what is he being celebrated for is slaying the beast. So there you have warrior God becoming warrior Jesus, saving his people, getting a song. So this like that more particularity to, hey, this sermon, this argument is for this passage and not another one. So just fill in the blanks on what kind of deliverance of fighting, and then what kind of praise of a warrior. I don't know, something like that. Did you try something new? Was there something that you thought, hey, this was a new skill or a new attempt, something you did well?
I think with, based on the worksheets that we worked with Soup with this, I had a lot more structure
Okay.
than he suggested. He actually helped me suggest kind of the twofold
Yeah.
part
I think
of
that's
it.
a great way to handle
So I'm gotta give him the credit for that
Yeah.
one. But,
All right, Soup, there you go. If you're listening to this, you get props.
no, I really like that move though, how it goes from that deliverance to praise.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Great. Yeah, it makes it really clean.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh man, you're about to handle a whole bunch of text.
Yeah.
And even if we were like a little bit lost in parts of it, it was like, oh yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a great way to do
Yeah.
it.
Once again, just some of your questions were just really good, and I really liked that, and they really made me think. And I like half of the things that I wrote down were like questions that you asked, and so I think that it was really good. I know I already said that, but it's just really good.
Ryan said what I was gonna say. But I guess in line with that, I would go with applications. You had a lot of really useful and direct applications, and I could tell that you had been considering your audience. Spoke very directly to, people in ministry.
Is there one or two you have in mind?
Yeah, I think when you said something along the line of like when we were facing like difficult times in ministry, are we trusting God? Are we praising Him? And then that made me think, even though you didn't mention that, but how does that even reflect to the people that we're ministering to? So I thought you had some great applications that carried on even in my mind, although you didn't mention that specifically, but that was great. You had some awesome stuff.
Theo.
I think one of the ways, like, again, with like handling like a big portion of scripture, and like how you dealt with the poem really effectively, is you highlighted this imagery of like the chariots in the water, and I think like you like re-emphasized it and brought it up, and like how like it mentions it in Exodus 15 a lot, and then you played with it a little bit in the Psalms a little bit, and I thought that was like a good way not to preach like two sermons, one on Exodus 14 and one on Exodus 15, but relate it all back to one sermon, which I thought that was a really good move to make.
And on a similar thing, I enjoyed the Psalms, and at first when you went there, I was like, oh, this is interesting. And then as you did it like 2 or 3 times, and even like that modern song, it was like, wow, yeah, this is a large part of this passage is just praising God for deliverance. So I think it worked out really well and helped us sort of bring in, tie in the Bible a little bit. So it was good.
Yeah, I was going to mention the adornment aspect, which kind of handles both of where they're at. Especially, I thought the Psalm 21 was pretty like remarkable because it's some trust in horses and others in chariots, which you had already set up by what you talked about in Exodus 15. Like Egypt had all these chariots and all that stuff, and then you're like, boom! But we trust in the Lord our God. So that was like one example. Like you were talking about like being hemmed in, working with goat, the song. Like these were all things I had written down as like you worked in. So you thought like you needed more illustration stuff. I thought it was pretty. I thought you gave us a few moments to breathe, like with those kind of things. It was still Bible.
Okay.
But it was a different like appropriation of the Bible that was making your point in poetic language. So I thought that was powerful. Brian, you know.
My favorite line of the sermon was, man, I just knew someone was going to say this too, but they didn't, so I guess was water. The water was a wall to the Israelites and a grave to the Egyptians.
Yeah.
I was like,
Watery grave.
man, I like felt the Red Sea come crashing down whenever you said that. I was like, boom! I loved it. There, and you had a couple other one-liners like that were really good.
Yeah.
Great. I really wish I could steal that. Like, I was like, man, I want to preach this sermon just to say that.
You can
Good.
steal it. You can't copy him, but you can steal it.
And right before that, you
Whatever.
said it was a highway for God's people,
Mm.
a watery grave for Egypt also,
Mm.
which was like really cool, the way you set that up and delivered it. You didn't need to like shout it or anything. You just felt the weight when you said it. It was
Yeah.
awesome. But if I were to go with somewhere else, since Brian already said that one too, I would say that there was an aspect of challenge to us as well. It wasn't just like, oh, look what God did and ta-da, that's it. You were also calling us to respond. How do you respond to what God has done? Do you doubt, do you fear, or do you praise? So I thought that was really, really good.
Yeah.
This has already been mentioned a little bit, but like, I said there was like a couple like weird phrasings in some of your stuff, but they stand out because you're actually like a really good storyteller, and I think you had like a couple of lines that were like really artistically like well done. Describing Revelations like a sea of glass mingled with fire. I think how is the Song of Moses like turned into the Song of the Lamb? Different things like that. It's just like really, you're a really good like writer and like really good like at pairing words together and stuff like that, and it makes me like see what you're saying very well. So, yeah, good job on that.
Trev?
And I enjoyed how you build some tension in some moments. And one of the good questions I think you asked was, or it was kind of a statement, I guess. God leads us into a place with no way out, and you're like, He led them to this place without a. And then you're like, why would He do that? And it just kind of drove up. I was
Yeah.
really engaged at that point. So those are good use of questions there.
Right. And even though I thought your kind of argument was maybe a bit generic to the text, you used it regularly, repeatedly, and consistently throughout. So your sermon had like a real coherence. Like nobody ended this sermon not knowing what you were talking about, right? And like your 2 points, right? Like we're gonna remember those a week from now. Somebody's gonna be like, oh yeah, Exodus 14 and 15. It's about the great deliverance leading to great praise. So you used them not like ad nauseum, but just enough regularly, making your points. There was clarity and coherency, kind of by how you used your argument, and then how you structured your homiletical points to argue for it. Like it's obvious how your points make your argument, right? So, well done.